Hello, everyone. Welcome to the New Music Symposium hosted by the Korean Cultural Society of Boston, sponsored by Consul General of Republic of Korea in Boston. Today, I am really excited to have another wonderful guest, Dr. K. Kyrim Rhie, or E. Kyrim in Korean. Dr. K. Rhie is a composer of contemporary classical music, which often explores issues of belonging and the science of acoustics. She accesses a wide-ranging palette of inspiration from classical, film, European avant-garde music, as well as various literary and artistic traditions. Born in South Korea, she grew up in Los Angeles. Her immigrant experience since her teenage years has given her an artistic base as a hybridizer. Rhie's music is described by American Academy of Arts and Letters as vehemence and reticence, intimacy and plainness coexist. And she has found an increasing audience. Past highlights include performances by the Tanglewood Music Center Orchestra, the BBC Singers, the Seoul Philharmonic Orchestra, the Moscow Contemporary Chamber Ensemble, TM+, Ensemble X, Windsor Music, In Mulieribus, and commissions by pianist Gloria Cheng and violinist Andrew Jennings, among many others. Her current projects include a chamber opera titled Quake, which is commissioned by Opera UCLA, and Five Petals, commissioned from the Los Angeles Philharmonic Orchestra, which will be premiered in the upcoming season. She's a recipient of many awards, including the Charles Ives Fellowship from the American Academy of Arts and Letters. And she was also the music fellow at the Radcliffe Institute of Advanced Study at Harvard University. More recognitions she won include those from the Ohio Music Festival, London Festival of American Music, the Tanglewood Music Center, where she won the Geffen Solomon New Music Commission, Seal Bay Chamber Music Festival, Aspen Music Festival and School, the Banff Center for the Arts, and the Chamber Music Conference and Composers Forum of the East, among many others. She earned her degrees from UCLA and her final degree at Cornell University, and currently teaches composition and theory at her alma mater, UCLA, as assistant professor of music. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. K. Rhie. And I'd love to ask a question to begin with. So if I read it correctly, you get inspirations from issue of belongings, the science of acoustics, and various literary and artistic traditions. And it's a very interesting combination to me. So could you elaborate a little bit?
Yeah, thank you, Texas, for first of all, the beautiful introduction and giving me the platform to talk about music, and for all the attendees for taking the precious time to be here. I described my inspirations as some simple twofold ideas, but it's really many things, because I think any creator would be really concerned with what to say and how to say it. So what comes from many different source materials, right? I read a lot for various things that I resonate with, but also certain life events and an outlook on life. I think all gets translated into the musical parameters when I write music. How I say it is slightly different thing. I've been fascinated with how composers actually put together disparate materials together to make something beautiful. I've started composing a little bit later in life than a lot of other composer colleagues that I've known. So how one says things was of great interest to me as a young composer. And sometimes how you say it actually becomes the essence of the piece. For example, I would look at the old pieces of music, and then the piece that you played in the background as the session began, I don't know if many of you were able to catch it. It was a response piece to the Bach famous Prelude in C. And what fascinated me was the perpetuum mobile idea, that the motion that doesn't stop. It's almost like a music box that keeps going. But for me, reinterpreting what had been done and my response to those ideas has always been one of the fascinating things, subjects. But also I think my experience as an immigrant, where most immigrant children go through at some point in their growing up experience in America or in any other country outside of the land that they were born in, I think go through the search for, you know, where do I really belong? Do I belong here? Do I belong there? Or is it important that I belong somewhere? So these sort of searches are, I think, essential to who I am. And also it gives me a little bit of a freedom to be a fence sitter. I'm on the fence all the time, and I can therefore look at both sides of the fence and somehow create a hybrid, not A or B, but something that looks like a C. But that's also personal. So that's been one of the inspirations for me over time. I don't know if that answers the question, but
No, that did, and then you know that a lot of people who have similar experiences would definitely resonate with the idea of not really belonging to any particular culture or scene, or yeah, yeah. And then did all these experiences influence you when you grew up as a musician, when you develop your own voice?
I think so. It didn't really occur to me what I was doing. I mean, the awareness of what I was doing came much later. I think earlier, I was just fascinated with how certain themes, how certain sounds were put together to make up a new shape, a new form, and you know, something that's coherent. And so the structure, you know, all those compositional details were interesting, but why I was doing certain things and what was I indeed saying, it sort of dawned on me later. And it seems like I'm really interested in, you know, something that seems like one thing, but it's actually layered with different meanings. And I think that comes from, like, you know, like films, right? There are like different sort of narratives simultaneously happening, and then one thing disappears and then another thing emerges. That sort of idea. So always kind of working with more than one thing, at least two or more things, has been sort of my trope, I think, a big narrative in my work. And also the color and color of sound, the acoustics of the instruments, what the instruments can do. Extreme sort of gestures or the color combinations. Those are, of course, I'm sure, all composers' concerns, but I sometimes just focus on, a very limited amount of material sources. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that was obvious from your the piece we listened to before the presentation began, the Prelude in C, which is also from very minimal material, and I was fascinated by the color you can extract from a single instrument of the piano. So yeah, I was really fascinated. Is the piano your main instrument, or how did you get to know the instrument so well?
Yes, piano was my first instrument. I studied piano since I was young, and I actually started college as a piano major, and I had an arm injury which prevented me from really pursuing a professional career. But I think all that experience of the piano literature also fed into my compositional language. I mean, I didn't study composition as a young musician, but all those amazing repertoire just, I think, taught me ideas about what sounds good. And, Bach, Chopin, Beethoven, all this literature repertoire, I think, became sort of the soil upon which my ideas grew.
Yeah, I mean, that's all great. I think it would be beneficial for us to listen to some of your music at this point. So would you want to just pick a piece so that we can just listen to?
Maybe we could listen to like one of the recent pieces called Sirius Night Bloom.
Okay.
Trio written for clarinet, violin, and cello. It rhymes like a seriousness, but it's actually flower. So Sirius is a particular type of flower that only blooms at night. Like we can't see them blossom in the full blossom shape in the daytime. They only bloom at night. It was inspired. Maybe we could listen and then talk about it.
Sounds great. Okay, everyone, this is Sirius. I think this was the excerpt that we had. Beautiful music. I know this is not my make any comment, but you know, it doesn't have a piano, but it's still so colorful with all these intricate passages interwoven among each other. And yeah, the harmony, especially. I'm very curious about how you picked all these harmonies, but I'm sure you have some other things you want to talk about first about this piece.
Oh, thank you for the kind words. It means a lot. I'm among, you know, a group of really talented composers. I've been watching your series, and I'm very honored. But this piece, it has, so the acoustics, of course, are sort of very important, right? There's this, you know, attack and decay and the frenzy that starts the piece. But like I was talking about how, you know, I like the structure that starts in one way, but it becomes completely something else at the end. So the end, you know, you heard how very, very soft, almost inaudible dynamic level of the clarinet multiphonics. That's how the piece ends. So that continues for about maybe 3 more minutes, and it's very quiet. So the genesis of the piece is actually from my personal experience when my father was very ill. All of a sudden, he passed away 2 years ago, and it was in the hospital. So, you know, all in the span of like 2 weeks, we found out that he had, you know, this cancer, and we were all very surprised. And there was a lot of frenzy, and I was spending a lot of time in the hospital. And in the end, I was really resigned. We knew how serious it was, and I was spending the night hours finishing this piece, actually writing in because he was able to hear, but very, you know, it was the quietest hours in the hospital room. And there was, you know, an image formed in my head about, you know, how hospital rooms usually have the flowers for, you know, and it was the quietest hours that I was able to kind of look at his life. And also from the frenzy of all this drama of the illness and the intensity of such an event was kind of crystallized into something very peaceful. And I was able to kind of reflect on his sort of immigrant experience, where my dad was a writer, and once he moved, he no longer devoted any of his time into creative writing. He was working for a newspaper, not doing any of his own creative work, but he was basically just, you know, busy putting food on the table. And so I didn't know how he was able to endure those years without being able to do what he always knew how to do back, you know, in Korea before we immigrated. And, you know, I was going through the hospital papers in his desk at home, and then I discovered these paperworks that he kind of collected as like potential source materials of his next book that he never got to finish. And, you know, I thought about those night hours where he was kind of celebrating, like, you know, by himself. And so I thought about these night flowers, like only blooming at night, you know, sort of metaphorically representing his life. And a lot of immigrant lives that are sort of spent in, you know, busyness of just, you know, bringing the food to the table, but not really being able to pursue the secret passion. So that was sort of my piece, like a personal program that I had in mind, because that also kind of gave me an impetus to end this piece very quietly, as if this is the quietest form of celebrating one's life.
Wow. First of all, I'm so sorry for your loss. And,
thank you.
Yeah. And and wow, such a heavy emotion you went through while writing a piece. No wonder I didn't know about all these details you mentioned, that, but suddenly it sounds even more emotional to me. Right. So you mentioned your father was a writer, and I am making some connection that you respond to lots of literary arts, have something to do with, I don't know, his, what can I say, gin that incorporates a lot of like literature and art. Do you also write by any chance?
No, I wish I did. I mean, I do some in my personal time, and there was a short period of time I also worked as a newspaper journalist between my undergrad and graduate years. So it's like a 3-year stint, but I'm really out of practice. But, you know, creative writing, and also, you know, so many of what we do, I find such parallel to the other artists, like writers and visual artists. I respond to when I look at paintings, and, you know, I think we are basically doing very similar things, just using different media. So I love getting inspired by these works, and I find inspirations about form, or you know, colors, or the emotional intensity and things like that. So perennial.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Okay. I totally understand. I mean, we are also writers in different ways, for sure. Composers are writers. But to be more specific, I found you have some songs that actually have text. So, and I am expecting that your sensitivity is somewhat different from what many others might have. So, are there some pieces with text, or pieces that you interpreted text with, that you wanted to share today?
Sure, there is, we can look at a choral piece, or maybe, do I have a song cycle as well. Whichever that you have up, I can sort of explain looking at the score. Maybe if it's a song cycle, I will love to just introduce some of the poems that.
Sure. Sorry, I have right in front of me a song cycle. I hear the sound of trees, and I will just put the score on, and then you can just explain us what it is about.
So if you can go back maybe a page or two, there's the text page. Yeah, this is like yeah, it's a song cycle about objects found in nature, or like one's relationship to nature. So a lot of us, you know, it's very natural for us to respond to. We get so much inspiration from around us, in the nature around us. So these are the poems that I sort of collected as having the same sort of themes of either like responding to what is happening out there in the world, and what is happening to me. How am I relating to nature or objects found in nature, and how does that reflect on my life? That was the theme. So there are three poems by, two poems by Walt Whitman, a famous poet, and then 3 poems by Archie Randolph Ammons. And Ammons was the English professor at Cornell University, and he was quite well known and beloved in the town of Ithaca, not to mention the entire, nation. The first poem that I really found attractive was number 2, Reflective. It's a very short poem, and it's almost like a palindrome shape. So it the way it starts, it kind of ends the same way. I found a Rhie that had a mirror in it, and that mirror, I'm reading the text in number 2, and that mirror looked in at a mirror in me that had a weed in it. So the it's a very short poem, but it's a perfect mirror shape, and I thought it was a very attractive setting. It's funny, and it's also about reflection, right? And as the title suggests, it's reflecting my life on a small weed that he found. So I set that song first, and then came Cascadilla Falls, which is actually an actual waterfalls in Ithaca. And that's also by Archie Randolph Ammons, and he basically talks about his journey through a hike alongside the Cascadilla Falls, and he picks up a small stone, and then he kind of reflects his life as if it's a waterfalls. It's it's this stream of water, and his doubts about life, or his concerns of not knowing where he belongs in this moment in time in life. So it was a beautiful sort of a trajectory there. And then another setting by Ammons was number 5, Love Song. That's sort of my ending of the cycle piece. And the entire set, I mean, there are 2 Walt Whitman settings that are really about also reflecting one's life. The first one is about, the dark night, and the stars that kind of open the space in our sort of emotional state to go a little bit inward after all the frenzy of the day's time. So, that's sort of the running theme of the song cycle. And the entire piece is sort of a mirror shape where, the third movement is the main central pillar, and the outer bookends sort of pan out, with the second and the fourth movement being sort of the interludes, and the first and the fifth movement sort of the bookends holding the piece together. So I kind of created a mirror shape, utilizing the idea of the reflection or the mirror. So it's about reflection of one's life, basically. So maybe you can listen to maybe 2, 3, and 5.
Sounds great. Well, sure. So we will listen to the 3 songs based on Ammons. So this is the first one. Okay, we're moving to the love song. That was Nat. Yes, I second on the applause. I can hear the like applause coming, exploding, and I agree with all the audience listening to the piece. And I wish I had more vocabulary to say something else than beautiful. Really, really, there are just so many layers and textures in the piece. We do have one question from the audience today. Dr. Byung Kim is asking about the instrumentation. So as we see, the instrumentation is, it's written for flute, clarinet, violoncello, and piano. How did you come up with this, oh, well, and the singer? How did you come up with the idea?
The instrumentation is the flute, clarinet, violoncello, and piano is considered a small orchestra for me, because of the woodwinds and then the string section, and then piano can do the percussion or a lot of the supporting work, both pitches and also the percussive effect. So the tradition comes from a piece called Piero Lumiere by an Austrian composer named Arnold Schoenberg, who wrote a piece, a very long, substantial cycle called Piero Lunaire. After he's written this landmark piece, this particular ensemble is called a Piero Quintet. So I just love the idea of this compact orchestra being able to accompany the singer. And the poets are, of course, both male poets, but the singer, I chose the soprano voice because I just felt like I was almost the narrator, because I resonated with the poem so much, because at the time of writing these pieces, I was so lost moving away from LA to Ithaca, and I was very I hit a dead end with my composition. So I was very much like sympathizing with the poet, saying, where is my life going? And I was walking down the same Cascade de la Falls, and I was like, I have to write this. So, but it was through sort of my voice, which I'm a female composer, so I chose a soprano to sing the set. But this piece has been sung by a tenor, and it works quite well, so I think it can work both ways.
Okay, well, very economic. You wrote one piece and then you could work in two different settings.
Yes.
And right, yeah, I mean, compact is a good word to describe this music. I am also impressed by, well, first of all, I can't imagine you being stuck with looking at this piece, because it's such a flowing piece. So I wouldn't be able to imagine your situation from the piece other than the text. But what I see instead is just you choose every single note really carefully. So that resonates with the idea of poetic and compact. And we have one comment from Facebook, and which is I think much better than what I could say. So what a poignant reflection on a beautiful piece.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was from Marianne Kim. And so who performed the piece?
This was Evelyn de la Haye, a Canadian soprano, and the players are actually the new from players of the Tanglewood Music Center. Yeah, so the quintet was formed by the New Music Special group at the Tanglewood Center, and the singer was from Canada. A beautiful singer, a wonderful singer.
Yeah. No, I mean, they did a wonderful job, like so musical. And I may just say this because I know some of the other pieces that are coming, but the last movement sounded to me like early music, some sort of like a reminiscence of early music in that the flute and clarinet sounds like almost like a recorder for some reason. Maybe just I was thinking wrong or because of my knowledge of today's program, but is that okay if I interpret it in that way?
Absolutely. I, I think that particular movement has definite traits of my love for the older music. I get a lot of inspiration from the Renaissance, medieval, all these weird sound, like, and I also wrote a response to the Baroque piece, Bach's piece, but these early music always kind of gives me, like a sense of timelessness, that I'm actually a time traveler. I'm accessing this old sound world and the emotions that always existed universally. So, but it also kind of it has a very simpler harmony and chords, and so it can sound like in a way like a song, like a modern song, but in an old way. So I think somebody actually commented that that's a movement that kind of speaks Americana for me, and the other movements may not so much. And I have other music that speak very different kinds of harmony, very jagged, but this is very pretty. So yeah, so I've been getting very different comments about this movement, the last movement. So I'm very happy that there was that interpretation about the relationship to the older music.
Okay, I'm glad. And speaking of which, I found you have a response to a Flow My Tears by John Dowland. And I think that this is a great time for us to talk about that piece. Would you mind explaining a little bit about the piece?
So this piece is, again, related to my inspiration. So how I got into composing was very much inspired by like encountering Stravinsky, because I was a pianist and there was not a whole lot of piano literature, by Stravinsky. I didn't know until like way later in my undergraduate education. And when I heard his music, it was like a world turning upside down. That one can express such raw and violent emotions. That was very new to me. So I was fascinated with Stravinsky for a long time, and then I also discovered his love for Cavalli and Gesualdo, really weird medieval chromatic music. And so I was like fascinated with how one shares this love for looking back, right? And this common, like the Western canon between the Baroque and the Romantic repertoire, sometimes we're too familiar with it. So in search for the new, actually for me, like also resonated with, looking back to old. So this new and old kind of meeting was like a full circle for me. So I was looking at, these old tunes, and Dowland's tune is a very famous one. I'm sure a lot of people will recognize this tune if you hear it. So maybe you can like play the YouTube clip of the original Dowland lute music, and then I'll see, you'll see what I've done with my string quartet based on it.
Okay, so let me just play the Dowland piece briefly first. Here we go.
Flow my tears, fall from your springs, exile forever let me mourn, when night's black bitter sad infamy sings, let me live for love.
Yeah, I mean, I'm totally with you in that. I love this piece as well. Okay, so let's listen to your own response to this beautiful Gowland song. Okay, and this is the score, and we will listen to the piece. Okay, we will skip to another part of the same piece. What a surprising ending. Gorgeous piece, very effective, and I can clearly hear the Dowland as there was a comment I saw. Yeah, like a gorgeous, and I was clearly able to hear the Dowland from more the holistic appearance. You know, you can see the melody as its original form, but now at the end, like it's almost like so dismantled, basically, right? So could you tell us about what you did? I mean, we can hear it, but I'm curious about your process, actually.
It's a variation, and I actually was inspired by a lot of the string quartet repertoire of the modern century, and I actually quote some in the piece. So it's not just Dowland, but I quote Harvey, I quote Ligeti, and I pull from a lot of inspirations that just taught me about how to write for this ensemble, because this was my first quartet writing, and it was daunting for me, and so I chose a very simple kind of a form. So Dowland is, of course, very clearly laid out in the beginning, but it's basically taking away the elements from it, and it's really, and in the end, it becomes about the central pitch D, around which everything sits on. So it was sort of my way of like, it's no longer, I mean, it was an inspiration, but it's no longer there. So it's sort of the dissipation of the original material into something very new. Yeah.
Yeah, now that you mentioned it, it kind of makes sense that, it's a great combination of old and super new, right? Somehow they are so well juxtaposed, and I can hear so many like interesting modern sounds as well. I think that was really interesting. What about the ending, like a D sharp? Why did it just move, like a deviated from the tonic or the central pitch at the end?
because it's really, in the end, it's about something else. And also I quote like Jonathan Harvey's harmonic language, and I think it's one of his ending too. So I kind of like deflecting away from, because you hear the D so much. There's so many harmonics and overtones on the D series. So the entire piece was based on what the D string can do, almost. So, and then I kind of end in a different way. So it's like everything's kind of going up in smoke into, you know, something that's kind of veiled from what's been laid out before.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you know, the way you describe it as well as the way it sounds are so poetic to me. You know, I studied chemistry, so what can I expect about from myself? But you know, like really, really beautifully laid out thoughts and the output as well, I think. Um, so speaking of more poets, I don't know, we have lots of other pieces we have today, but if I may pick, if you don't mind, I am curious about, well, let's move to the Arirang. That's a very short piece, and then we listened to a bit of it when in Ji-hye Chang visited us and present lots of Korean composers' music, and it was one of the gorgeous pieces she presented. And I'm picking this piece particularly because so far I've seen so many different inspirations or backgrounds or influences, but Arirang is the only Korean, explicitly Korean thing I can draw. So why did you even decide to write this piece?
I think because Arirang is one of those tunes that just lives in me, and I'm sure all Koreans. And so this was one of the movements of the miniatures, a series of miniatures that I have written, but I wrote it in like one sitting. It was like almost like a spontaneous writing. This was one of the few pieces I just didn't even make any revisions. And that's very rare for me because I revise and revise until, I don't know. But this just came out very naturally. So I recognized, you know, later on that I must have always wanted to do this. But of course, the way I did it is very veiled. I mean, I wrote melody on top, staff, and then I closed it, each of these notes with different chords and harmony surrounding it. So it's hidden, but the player is clearly able to see the entire tune of Arirang above the piece. So it's almost like you're singing this song, Arirang song, but with different chords. It's almost like a accompaniment of this Arirang tune. But to me, it sounded very natural, very audible, but other people have told me that they can't hear it. So it'll be interesting whether you hear it or not. Maybe the score being there would be helpful.
Okay, sure. So let's just, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Dr. Chan gave a gorgeous performance of it, and everybody plays it slightly different. And so since she already performed it here, I wanted to bring in like another interpretation. Maybe it'll be less audible, the tune, or more audible. Yeah.
Okay, sounds great. Let's see if we can hear the original tune. Oh, not this piece. Another beautiful piece. And well, to me, knowing the tune or the original tune, it's just I cannot not see or not hear the tune. To me, I'm not sure how others would feel, but it's really, really obvious to me.
Okay, good. So I'm very happy to hear that. I meant it to be heard, but they said I can't hear it. I almost a survey like, can I poll?
Right. I mean, I'm not sure how others would feel, but feel free to just chime in if you heard the tune, just to let us know so that, Dr. Rhie might be a little more confident about what she did. um, also, I'm kind of mad that you wrote this like in one sitting, basically. This is so complex. The harmony is so, I don't know. I mean, how did you come up with this harmony? Just play, 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 and then it just happened? What?
This piece just happened in one sitting. I never went back. It's strange. It's strange, right? But I don't have those experiences very often at all. So don't be mad because it doesn't really happen.
No, yeah, I'm half joking, but I mean, that's still really, really like impressive that you wrote this in one sitting. So all the chords were just intuitively chosen, basically.
The chords are definitely they're bluesy chords, right? There are a lot of seventh chords.
That I don't hear.
And stacked seventh, basically, right? So, but I also kind of like, I mean, the recurring, I kind of call them pillar chords, like those very, the extreme end chords, the top and bottom that opens the piece and happens in the middle twice and then it ends the piece. So that's sort of like it's sort of my experience with the Korean sound, like the bell sound. It's this very meditative experience. This piece is very peaceful, right? So and then there was a middle section where so that's a bitonal sort of clash, and it's almost like a dream land. So it's heard clearly, but it's against something. So I think that's almost like my experience. Like you're kind of looking at something through another lens, right? So it's veiled. So that kind of thing, I think, was probably intuitive to me because I love my heritage as Korean. And whenever I go to Korea, I feel this enormous sense of like being at home. It's very strange. I left many years ago, 30 some years ago. But whenever I land back, I just immediately feel such affinity, and there's a little bit of a grief, I think, sadness to having left the place I love. And so I think that's a little bit sort of it's the undercurrent of this piece. The harmony is a little bit bittersweet. And it's also through like a shard of, fragmented glass or something. It's not to your face. It's a little bit, curtained. So I think that's sort of that was the state of my emotion when I thought about Arirang. It's something that I treasure, and I think it's very precious. But I was standing a little bit, by force, right? I was. So that sort of state of emotion or a mind might have really played into the choice of pitches or the harmony that I picked, I think.
Yeah, what's interesting to me from what you just said was a little bit about your immigrant experience. So every immigrant has his or her or their own story, I'm sure. And so when exactly did you come to the States, and then how was it when you came to the States? And I think I became curious about this because I see a lot of multi layers in your music, and that's exactly what you just mentioned
Right.
as your experience. Yeah.
So when I came, I was a ninth grader, so I was a teenager. So I went through high school onwards, and at the time it was in the late 80s, and Korea was in a very transitional period. I think before then, I think we were still kind of coming out of a difficult third world sort of status, and then with the Olympics, I think Korea became like a burgeoning, thriving country. And so I left the country right at the cusp of that transition. So when I went back to Korea in my 20s and 30s, every time I went back, it was like unrecognizable. But things in the States moved very differently, right? Slow. And, I also, it's a very difficult time to transition as a teenager because I grew up in Korea, my main language being Korean and everything. But, I was busy sort of becoming acclimated to the new culture, new language, new school system and everything. So this issue of identity didn't really come up until later. Even I think I still grapple with it now, right? And whenever I go back, I think about my music and why I write music the way I do. And sometimes I think about the disparities, like you mentioned, the multi-layers. I mean, I look at Korean landscape and I just think this has to do something. This has to do with why, I look at the mountains, right? Like immediately I go to Seoul and then I see these beautiful mountains, dramatic mountains, nothing like the ones we see in California. It's not, rolling hills, or it's not this, vastness. It's very dramatic, and it's like I went to Seorak Mountain at one point for a hike, and then I took this turn, and then it was a completely different mountain. And it was very dramatic. And this sort of lines that we see, I saw growing up, must have had something to do with the intensity of and the love of drama. I don't think Koreans can write something like minimalism. It's this. I don't know. It's really something very internalized. The way we experience the arc of events is very different, I think. And so I think, and also my identity as a woman, I think about this a lot. And, I think about why certain composers choose to express certain things in a more Western ways versus the more traditional way. One reason simply being I don't have a lot of knowledge in the traditional Korean music, which I would still love to do. I find it fascinating and beautiful. But I grew up with, first and foremost, with the Western repertoire, even in the Korean school system. Our music textbooks had, these German songs and these folk tunes, and a little bit about the Korean traditional music. And each classroom had a piano or organ, right? These are Western instruments, and we became so accustomed to the Western scales before we got introduced to the pentatonic scales of our traditional music and so on. So for me, it's what is my first musical language is probably the Western language. That's sort of the basic material, but how I do it. So what and how are two different things. But how I say certain things, I think, has a lot to do with my Korean background. the intensity, or yeah. So it's a fascinating topic that I perennially go back to. But I don't know how I got to this topic. Am I answering your question?
I forgot my own question, but this was just a so insightful and fascinating talk. So no, I mean, wow, yeah. And it goes way back to the very first statement about how and why. And I think and that has something to do with your idea of reflection in your first piece you shared today. Dr. Byung Kim has a question. In your music, do you want to capture immigrants' sense of loss? Like, as opposed to belonging, it could be interpreted as not belonging. Or do you want to still instill some hopes or transcendence beyond the loss? Maybe both, but what is the message?
Yeah, that is,
in other words,
captured. I think you're absolutely right. My reason for exploring the issues of belonging is because I exclusively don't belong anywhere. And my adult life was really coming to peace with that fact that it's okay to not belong anywhere, that I'm just passing through. And yes, there's the definite sense of loss. But on the other side of the coin is that we transcend, right? And it liberates us that we are a citizen of the world, the humankind. Human experience is always universal. But again, there's something very inherently Korean and about me, and I will always go there, I think. And I'm kind of looking forward to exploring more of the beautiful, enigmatic Korean sound in the future. I hope to do that. But I'm actually I feel kind of free to choose, as anybody should, right? So that's there are trade-offs, I think, where I stand. So there is that definite sense of loss for sure. And Dr. Byung Kim captured it so beautifully. You just saw right through what I always kind of, I think, end up saying. Yeah.
Yeah, well, excellent conversation. I think this is a good time to talk about your upcoming project, because one of them had something to do with this type of emotion and message. So could you talk about those pieces?
Yes. One of the upcoming projects is my chamber opera called Quake. So I spent about 15 years in the East Coast, and then I moved back to Los Angeles to start teaching at the university here in Los Angeles. And when I was commissioned by Opera UCLA to write a chamber opera, I immediately thought about, and they asked, do you have something that has to do with Los Angeles? And I thought hard about what Los Angeles can be. And it was a home to me for a very long time before I moved away. But what does a home mean in Los Angeles? So I kind of thought about this a lot. And then Los Angeles is a city where, hopeful stars flock to. So it's a city of glory, but it's also a city of hopes dashed, right? There are not too many people who actually rise to the stardom, but there are many star hopefuls, right? But also it's a land where it's very unstable, and there are a lot of earthquakes, and so the title Quake, meaning like I wanted to kind of portray this story about people wanting to reinvent their lives, kind of recreate their lives in Los Angeles. So I actually ended up going to the old myth, the Greek myth of Odysseus. So Odyssey has an ending, right? So the whole entire myth is about Odysseus's journey back home to Ithaca, to his wife and family. Right, wife Penelope is waiting, and she has to fend off all these difficulties waiting for him, and it takes him many years, 17 years, I think, maybe it was more, I forget. But many years take him back because Poseidon was really mad. The god of ocean was really mad at him because he killed, his son Cyclops. And Athena, the goddess, actually helps Odysseus come back to Ithaca. So in my reimagination of this ending of Odyssey, Ithaca is Los Angeles, and Penelope is, the modern day woman who's really mad at Odysseus, modern Odysseus, who's left her. So she's a divorce lawyer in LA, and Otis is trying to come back. He's been busy making a career as a songwriter, and then he's now weary. He wants to come back to his wife, but the gods are not happy. So Athena is actually a goddess living among the humans, and she's actually a diva singer. She's a real goddess, but posing as a singer. So it's a comedy. It's actually a comedy. And Sa is this cafe owner, barista, who's friends with Penelope, and also Athena and Sa always kind of bicker about, I'm not going to let Otis come back. So it's like a comedy, but then it's actually a love story. They want to reunite, but they're up against, these past. So it's about and then Otis realizes in the end, home is not Los Angeles. It's with Penelope. It's with her. It's not a place. Home is not really a place. So that's what I wanted to say. So the story arc is kind of, reinvented sort of ending of the Odyssey. And I have a short, they're rehearsing right now the opera. Because of the pandemic, they couldn't rehearse together, so it's been delayed. And so the singers are rehearsing right now to learn the piece. So I don't have a recording professional, it's not staged yet or anything, but I have a vocal piano workshop that I had some singers read through, so I can share end of scene 1, where Athena is interacting with Otis. So Athena is like a hidden helper behind Otis's return. So she hires Otis to write a new song for her debut, return debut album. But Otis didn't know this, right? So he thinks he can sort of, be witty and get on our good side. But Athena says, no, you're doing me a favor. I'm actually helping you come back. So there's a little bit of interesting dialogue between Athena and Otis. So that's the read through. It's not a professional, I apologize. It's not like a polished performance, but I do have a reading of that ending aria of Athena, basically telling Otis to know your place. This is not anymore men's world. It's also about a feminist sort of statement. So we can maybe share that bit of the opera.
Sure. Yeah. And because of the time, probably we will end our session with listening to the excerpt. But before it, could you also tell us about the other piece that you're writing?
So, I didn't realize. I'm sorry, I didn't keep track of the time. Yes, I do have another upcoming project commissioned by the LA Philharmonics. It's a song cycle, and I use texts by Teresa Hakyung Cha, dictate, and then 3 other poems by the modernist poets from the Japanese occupation era. And then the modern Korean poet Hae-sun Kim, all about sort of the displacement. right? So they all kind of talk about, where is my home? I live here, but I don't really belong here. For the, Kim So-wol and Lee Sang-hwa, these are famous poems that we all know. Their land is taken over by the Japanese people. And Teresa Hakim-cha, she was Korean American, and it's her sort of look into her identity, search for identity. I'm so sorry, I didn't keep track of.
No. I mean, no, that was just so engaging, and it didn't feel like even an hour so far. So thanks for your great presentation and talk, inspiring talk. So next week we will have two guests, Michael Sidney Thompson and Jisun Lee, who are currently in South Korea, and we will talk about their music and their experiences as non-Korean composers in the land of Korea. So that would be a different way to think about immigrant experience. But again, let's give an applause to Dr. Carey.
Thank you, Korean Cultural Society of Boston. And thank you, Dr. Taek-soo Kim, for a wonderful session. It was such a privilege and honor to be with you all.
Yeah, and as I always say, everyone stay safe and stay musical, and then we will see next week. Okay, and then I will play the piece.